Hello, welcome back to another video. This is Fady from Harvey Productions. And in today's video, I want to talk about a full walkthrough for the API 2500 compressor, the analog unit. We'll talk through the functions, all the buttons on it, what's the features, and how to use it, as well as we're going to go through a Pro Tools session with a lot of samples in it and engaging the compressor and see the effect and the tone of that compressor. A couple years ago, I bought a new API 2500 compressor, and it was the newer version. It's called API 2500 Plus. It's pretty much the same as the normal one, except for one extra feature in it that they just implemented in the Plus that I absolutely love, and I'll be showing it in the walkthrough. So make sure to stick around and let's hop in. Okay, as you guys can see, here's my API 2500 Plus. Was that one extra feature over here that we're just going to talk about in just a second. I have this plugged into my patch bay, which is the Flock audio. I made a completely separate, right here, made a completely separate video about this. You guys can find it in my YouTube channel. Okay, so let's walk through this from left to right and all the functionalities of this. API is it's a very, very famous compressor. They're very well known for their punch, as well as the versatility in what you can do with that compressor. That's why they're more expensive, because it's not just reduction, gain, input and output, and then that's it. There's a lot more that you could do with the API, with tone and color and knee and everything, and that's why they're pretty expensive, because of all the features that are being offered through it. And also they're very famous for their tone, and studios have used this for years. So starting here is your threshold, which is pretty much it sets the level when the compression begins, and then it varies from plus 20 dB all the way to negative 20 dB. And in the second here you see the attack, and in the attack it sets the time that takes the compressor to react when the level exceeds the threshold. Basically you have all the way from 0.3 millisecond, and then you have it all the way up to 30 millisecond. And then after that is the ratio, which is it's set the ratio of the input versus the output for how much compression is happening. And you have fixed ratios from 1.5 all the way to 10:1 ratio. And then normally in compression, the moment you hit the 10:1 ratio or any further past that, you basically, your compressor at this point is becoming almost like a limiter at that point. And then last is release, which I love this feature here at the API, because you have the normal release from 0.5 seconds all the way to 2 seconds right here. But it also has variable release, which I really like that, because it basically, you can vary all the way from 50 millisecond all the way to 3 seconds. Okay, after that, tone selection. This is one of the, basically makes that API stand out pretty much. It's this section right here, because all the way until this point, you find that in majority of other compressors. So right here, you have the first button right here, which is your knee. And then you have soft, hard, and medium. If I would simplify it a lot, it's basically, this feels like a very gentle compressor. This is pretty hard, like you can hear the compression a whole lot more, and this is medium. And in the knee, it basically controls the compressor transitions into compression. So this is like a sharp response. So hard is a sharp response curve, the medium is a slightly rounded response curve, and then the soft is slightly gentle. I mean, their names pretty explain what they do. Okay, now going to the second one, which is the thrust, and it's one of their patents actually for API. It's a pretty cool feature, especially nowadays with a lot of music are more low-end heavy. And with low-end heavy music, you have a problem that the compressor is engaging a little too soon, because you have a lot of bass in your mix, because of the nature, like EDM music and a lot of pop music now have that as well. Then you end up smashing your mix because it's engaging on your low end. If I would simplify thrust a lot, it's basically controlling how much of that low end is making that compressor engage. There's obviously a lot more that goes into it than just this, but if I would say it in a very simple way, if you set it at loud, again, you're allowing a loud mix with a lot of low end in it to pass through without engaging the compressor way too soon on the low end. And that really helps you to pass, whether it's a drum kit or a drum bus or like a full mix even, because I do that with full mixes, that has a lot of low end in it, and then it doesn't feel that it has that pumping effect where it keeps ducking because the low end keeps engaging the compressor too soon. Then medium, it will be less, and then normal is basically working as a standard compressor. It will engage based on the full frequency signal that you're giving it. So if it has a lot of low end, it'll engage it fully from that low end, or if it's balanced or depending on the genre, I'll just engage the compressor depending on what audio signal you're sending on a full frequency range without making any adjustments to it. I really like this feature a lot because a lot of times we send a drum bus through an API, but then if you are mixing that drum bus with kick heavy, because that's the preference that you're going for, then the compressor is going to engage way too much if it's on the normal setting. So I would switch it to either medium or loud depending on how much low and heavy that drum bus is, and then that way I can still engage my compressor on the low end without crushing my low end, giving it a little bit more punch, as well as preserving the highs and the whole mix. Okay, then the next one is tone or type. And then basically there are two different circuits inside here. You have a new and then you have an old. The old is simulating basically the old school feedback compressors. And then the new is more punchier, more modern compressor. And it's pretty obvious actually the difference between both. And it's really cool because it's almost like you got yourself two different compressors in here that react different and have different tone and character to your mix or to whatever that you're passing through. The next feature is your link, and that links your left, because this is a stereo compressor, but you have the option to basically, so IND, which is independent, all the way to the left. It makes both circuits engage independently depending on the gain and the signal that you're sending through, and then you can now start linking 50%, 70%, 90%, and all the way to 100% where are completely linked. And then the last on this feature is the filter and the shape, and you have a slow and fast, or you can engage both at the same time. So here's slow, green, fast, and then both at the same time. So this is basically cycling through the speed of the left and the right control voltage link. There's faster, slower, and both engaged at the same time, or none. Then going to the output right here, I really like this feature. It's the makeup gain. So if I have it like this, that means this button, which is the gain output, it doesn't work anymore because the API is making an automatic makeup gain to your volume. So depending on how much reduction is happening, it will compensate for that. And then if you turn it into manual mode, then I can manually adjust the output gain for the compressor depending on how I want it to be. Now the last part in here, this is the new feature that is added in the API 2500 Plus compressor, and they don't exist in the previous ones. Also, if you notice a lot of the plugins out there, their simulation is actually of the API 2500 and not the 2500 Plus. You will notice a lot of the plugins don't have this feature in it. Maybe some of these companies will end up updating their plugin and then include that feature in it in the future, but as far as I know, because I use the one from Universal Audio, I also own the one from Waves, and they both don't have that feature in it. And this what it does, so in means compressor is engaged, disengaged. I believe this is still at the old compressor, but the blend is where it comes in really handy. Basically, it's allowing you to do parallel compression. So I'm blending that mix. Then there's two ways to blend it. I'll explain them in just a second. And then right here is how much of that blend is happening. So it's 0%, 40%, and all the way to 100%. I like this feature a lot because that allows you to run parallel compressors without having to split the signal through another unit that allows you to parallel process that. And it's a parallel compression is a very common feature that you would use in mixing. And then basically under X stands for crossfade, and it sets a percentage of input and compressed signal. So if I have it on this and I go to 60%, that means it's 60% of the signal is the input, and then the rest of it is the compressed signal. It basically splits the signal in percentage, and then now your mix becomes the percentage of how much is your input signal versus how much is the compressed signal. But then the second one is parallel, and then it basically sets the percentage of the compressed signal plus the percentage or the remaining percentage of the dry signal. So you're adding both next to each other on top of each other, if that makes sense. So 0% sends only unattenuated input signal to the output. 50%, if I set it like this, it will send 50% of the input uncompressed signal plus 50% of the compressed signal, and then those are being added up here. So let's say I set it on 100%. A crossfade at 100% will send only the compressed signal to the output. But if I run it into parallel, it will send 100% of the dry signal plus 100% of the compressed signal. So I hope that makes sense at that point. Which is really cool because I not only have parallel compression, I have a control over sending both at the same time or sending a mix and a blend between those. It's similar in Pro Tools when you have you put the plugin on your mix bus, and then you have a percentage mix in it, or you create a second mix bus and then you process that second one different, and now you're combining both the dry signal and the compressed signal combined together. And then over here basically is your output meter, and then there's 3 buttons. The reduction, you can show how much reduction is happening, or you can show the output, or you can show the input. And then over here you have bypass. And the difference between in and bypass, so in is engaging the compressor or disengaging the compressor, but they're actually still running through the circuits in here. And then bypass is the true hardware bypass, where as the signal is skipping all the components of this unit altogether, which is really cool for being able to referencing your mix just without anything API, or with the API compressor engaged, or still running through all the circuits in here, but no compressor being engaged. Now that we've gone through all these features, let's jump into our Pro Tools session, and then let's see that compressor in work. Okay, here we go. We got a basic session in here that has a bunch of samples in it, from bass guitar, some snare, some drum rooms, some pianos, acoustic guitar, and some vocals. And let's kind of dig in. So right here, here's a snare, and these are straight from, I'm using here a 57 that is going through my Neve 1073, and I did not process that signal at all. So it doesn't have any EQ or gate or anything at all. This is just raw signal of that snare mic going straight through a 1073 preamp. Okay, so this is the raw signal. Let's now play a little bit with the API and see what can we get out of it. I'm going to start with the most gentle settings. This is mono, so it's only going to engage the left side right now. And then there's compressor is engaged. There's no parallel compression yet. And then I'm going to adjust. My attack is at 1. My ratio is at 4. And then my release is at 0.5. And then we'll adjust the threshold here. Okay, so we're getting about 3 dB reduction right now, and we're running on the old tone. One thing about hardware compressors that I have noticed, you can push hardware compressors more than plugins and it still doesn't ruin your sound. So let's kind of play with that. I'm going to keep everything exactly the same, and I'm going to try to push the threshold a whole lot more, and then let's see what would that sound like. Okay, now let's change the attack, and then I'm going to actually compress even more at 6:1 ratio. There we go. And now it's doing the auto gain makeup, and you can obviously tell the difference. It's significant tone difference. I mean, I probably wouldn't compress that much, but you could tell the difference. Okay, now let's play a little bit with, let's get maybe like 4 dB compression. Okay, so we're at 4 dB compression. Let's now go through the tone, and let's change the tone a little bit back and forth and see the difference between the new and the old. So here's the new. The new one has a little bit more punch to it, and because we're not compressing way too much, the difference is slightly subtle. You probably feel it more when you're engaging that compression a whole lot more. Now let's implement the parallel compression, and then let's see what that would sound like. I'm going to start with the crossfade one. I'm going to run it at 50-50. So 50%, 50%, and I'm probably going to compress a little bit more since we're doing parallel compression. I really like the parallel compression. I use that a lot, and it's one of my favorite features in here. I'm going to try the second setting for the parallel compression to run them in parallel mode, so it's adding the dry signal to the compressed signal, and I'm doing 50-50, and then I'll change it as we're listening. For the snare drum, I kind of like that one even more than the crossfade. Let's push, so the thrust won't really matter as much in here since I don't have a lot of low end even engaging at that point. I'm going to keep this as a new, and then I'm going to push that knee a little hard. And I want to see, like I want to hear that really harsh compression happening, and I'll see what it sounds like. I'm going to turn off the parallel mode, so it's completely full compressed signal, and I'm going to compress at 6:1 ratio. So let's just push that compressor to its hard limits, and let's see. You can tell as I was changing the attack, the snap of the snare is changing, because the faster the attack, it's getting rid of that snap at the beginning, and then the slower the attack, it's also preserving that snap, the transients of the snare at the beginning of when the stick hits the snare head. I obviously won't mix at that much compression, but that was just to show you guys pushing it hard and hearing the tone of that compressor being pushed hard. Let's try the drum room. So I'm putting everything back, new compressor. So now we're going to be, that's a stereo, no, that's actually a mono drum. So this is a mono drum room track, and this was a Neumann U87 running through a Neve 1073, and again, it's completely unprocessed. There's no EQ or anything at all. This is the raw signal. In the placement of that drum room, we placed it probably about 12 inches off the ground, and it's about 3 feet in front of the kick drum. Let's listen right here. That's without any compression. And then let's engage the compressor. Let's try with the simpler settings. So we're at 1 and we're at 4:1 ratio. You can instantly feel the punch in the kick and in the snare drum the moment I engage that compressor, which really helps, especially when you have a lot going on in your mix. You want that punch so that way it cuts through a whole lot more. Let's push that thrust more to the loud. So that way we basically are telling it to not engage too much based on the low end, so preserve the low end and not crush it. And so we should be getting a little bit more punch in the low end when we are adjusting that tone to loud. So let's see. You guys can actually even see it visually with your eyes in here, that it's the low end is compressing about 2 or 2.5 dB, and then the snares, which mids and highs, are actually compressing a little bit over 4 dB. Let's try it again really quick here, and then you can take a look. Now if I change it back to normal, now the compression are slightly closer to one another, where that kick is compressing about 2.5 or 3 dB, but then the highs are compressing slightly under 4 dB, which is slightly closer to one another. Let's grab medium. And again, this drum room, it's not like super low heavy because it's not EDM music with like a lot of bass and sub bass in it. So the moment I went to the loud, I can tell now it sounds different than the normal. Let's also grab that knee to a little bit harder. We'll put this at medium, put this as hard. Really like it at hard actually for the drum room. I normally try to crush the drum rooms a little bit more. Now let's grab the blend in parallel mode. I'm gonna do 60 to 40. Actually, let's do 50-50 first. And there we go. You can innocently feel the sustain on the snare, where when it hits, you'd have a little bit more sustain to it because of that parallel compression. I'm gonna push it a little bit harder to 80. It's a very noticeable difference, I'm pretty sure. I would probably use it maybe around 60, and then here is in the crossfade feature instead of parallel feature. it sounds very different going from the crossfade to the parallel feature. And that's what I like about that compressor. Like I can, by just adjusting my blend, it sounds different. By adjusting my tone, it sounds different. By adjusting my thrust, it sounds different. By adjusting my type, new versus old. So let's try this really quick. So here's at the new. So the new has more forward punch to it versus the old has a slight less punch to it, a little bit gentler. So again, and as you continue to mix between all these features across the whole thing, there's just a lot that you can get out of that compressor, and a lot tone-wise. So now that we've gone through this, I'm going to also leave some samples in the comments below, so that way you guys can download these samples from Dropbox and listen to it. I would say APIs are very famous for their tone. Drums is one of the main things that APIs are famous for. I'll also include some samples for bass guitar and some acoustic guitar running through the API as well, so that way you can listen to all of it. I hope this was helpful to walk you through whether you have a hardware unit or a software like the plugin. Understanding all the features in it is a key to be able to utilize it to its full potential. There's a lot more than just pulling automated presets from the software, or just engaging compressor is engaged, and then you're adjusting threshold and how much reduction is happening, and this is it. But if you actually have one of the API 2500 or the 2500 Plus, there's a lot more features to it that if you understand all of them, you can get a lot more out of that compressor. Whether you're processing a full mix bus or a drum bus or a bass guitar, or even in mastering, because I've actually used that in mastering a little bit. It was a very gentle compressor to get that little bit of a punch, the tone of that API punch that I really like. It's a signature from the API. I hope this was helpful for you guys today, and I'm gonna do another video, and in that video I will be talking about the difference between the API 2500 hardware unit versus the plugins, and we'll run a lot of A/B and sampling between both and see how much of a difference it sounds, the analog versus digital. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.